Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So I'm going to go through an article by Clementine Ford called "This is the Personal Price I Pay for Speaking Out Online," in which the brave vaginal warrior Clementine Ford, who is a strong, independent woman, explains to us how nasty comments on the internet make her afraid. It must be a very hard line to walk, the one where you're pretending to be a brave, strong, independent woman, yet at the same time trying to get victim points by saying that you're cowering and you're afraid. It's interesting how a lot of feminists seem to walk this line. Now, look, of course, nasty comments on the internet can get a person down. No doubt about that, right? But that's part of the price you pay for being a public figure. Not because she's a woman, but because she is a public figure who routinely makes controversial statements. Now, you may say she's making these controversial statements as clickbait, or to stir the pot, or to get a reaction so she's then got something to talk about. Or maybe she's just a hardcore bigot. Possibly a combination of all those things. But the point is, she's a public figure. People have the right to reply. And, of course, this doesn't go just for women or feminists. It applies to anyone who's a public figure. For example, Donald Trump. Once again, I'm no fan of Trump or Hillary. I thought they were both bad choices. But Trump has received a massive amount of backlash, which, is part of the job, right? And no one says, well, the only reason Trump is getting this backlash is because he's a man. Of course not. He gets it because he is a public figure, a controversial public figure. That's the point. The more controversial you are, and the better known you are, the more backlash, the more criticism you're going to get. Clementine doesn't seem to understand this for some reason. But let's have a look at the article.
A lot has been written about the consequences of doing activism online, particularly if you work in the feminist space. Too often, these testimonies or complaints are dismissed as the rantings of oversensitive baby women. We provoke it, we're told. Some of us are even accused of courting it, laying traps to ensnare the splendid chaps who wouldn't normally dream of dropping by to talk about the various ways you should be beaten or violated, but who just couldn't resist telling you this one time how your face looks like a bridge fell on it.
Okay, obviously there are different types of criticism. There's good criticism, which is constructive, and bad criticism, which isn't. Saying that you want someone to be beaten or raped is obviously a bad type of criticism. Saying someone's face looks like a bridge fell on it also isn't very constructive, although in some cases it may be true. But the point is, it doesn't help. It doesn't further the discussion. And what it does is it gives people like Clementine something to focus on instead of dealing with actual criticism and having an actual discussion, right? It gives them a get out of jail free card, because they can now say, oh look, these people aren't really interested in talking to us, they're just interested in calling us names, and it's because we're women, and they focus on that instead of actually focusing on legitimate criticism. So it's not helpful, and I wish people wouldn't go around doing this shit. Now, she also says that feminists like her are accused of provoking it or even courting it, and in Clementine's case, I would say that is absolutely true. I think she is purposely controversial to stir the pot and get a reaction. That's her brand. It reminds me a little bit of Milo in that sense. Although, to be honest, I'd much prefer to have a conversation with Milo than Clementine. I think he would be a bit more open-minded, even though there are some things I strongly disagree with him on, namely circumcision. I think he'd be a little bit more open to discussion than Clementine, who strikes me as a narrow-minded bigot. Now, how much of that is an act and how much of that is her personality, who knows? Let's continue.
Most of us have become good at laughing about these intrusions. We screenshot them and caption them with withering commentary to invite everyone else to mock ruthlessly as well.
Yes, and that is the very best way to deal with that type of criticism. I myself have done it before. If someone is incapable of having a proper discussion with you and making clear points, then why not embarrass them by using it as an example of what a moron they are. I've done this numerous times in the past. However, I am also capable of having proper discussions with those who are willing to have proper discussions, as well as to address actual criticism. I find people like Clementine tend to hide behind the abuse and ignore the actual criticism. Next.
But there is a cost to the relentless onslaught of this violence, and it leaves one weary and skittish.
Yes, the thing is, Clementine, it is a double-edged sword, right? I can understand if you write an article and you get 100 nasty comments, you're not having a good day. I get that. But as a men's rights activist who constantly has to deal with the bullshit in the media by people like you, why the double standard? Why is it okay for people like you to lie and misrepresent us in the media? The constant stream of bullshit we get. Apparently that's okay. Apparently that's not an issue. But you getting nasty comments is, for some reason. Do you think some of those nasty comments might be because of the bullshit and misrepresentation? Now, once again, I don't think that's the best way to deal with people like you, but on some level, I can understand it. So if you're going to call nasty comments in your comment section violent or violence, then surely you yourself are a violent person based on your articles. Otherwise, you're playing with a double standard here. Next.
It's not so much in the uninvited, unflattering commentary about appearance or sexual desirability. As foul and hateful as the language of this is, it's mostly just boring to hear over and over how disgusting a stranger finds you.
Yeah, once again, I can empathise with you, Clementine. You're talking about name-calling and not actual arguments. And, you have a fair point. I just wish you'd deal with the criticism as well. But once again, as an MRA, we get this shit all the time. We're told that, we're angry at women because they won't date us, and we're angry virgins living in our mother's basements. And we have, bullshit stereotypes with fedoras thrown around the internet. I don't recall hearing you speak out against that. Maybe I missed it somewhere. I don't know. Next.
No, the cost is in the slow and steady encroachment of your physical and mental space. It's in the knowledge that there are people who try to track down your home address while updating their progress in private online groups filled with other people trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, once again, it's a fair point. Anyone who's trying to track down your home address is a bad person. I fully agree. It's one of the reasons why I keep my own identity secret. Most likely nothing would happen, but why risk friends, family, and future employment? So I agree with you here, Clementine. But surely these people are the minority, right? And surely this is something which all public figures have to deal with. Not just women and not just feminists. Next.
It's in the realization that these same people track the details of your work events, emerging as soon as those details are announced to heap abuse on the people who have engaged you to appear for them. It's in seeing the obsessive blog posts they write about you on the website that seems increasingly devoted to monitoring only you expand to include first your partner's name and then your child's. It's an understanding that the vigilance you thought you enacted before to protect both of these people has to increase tenfold because they didn't ask to be implicated in the unfortunate consequences of your chosen profession, and any fears you've ever had about your safety pale in comparison to the ones you have about your baby.
Yeah, once again, some good points here. I agree. People should not be attacking your husband and your baby. And if you find that they are, contact the police. That's simple. That's what they're there for. But once again, this is the risk that any public figure runs, right? I don't know much about Richard Spencer, nor do I particularly want to, because I don't like the guy. So I don't know if he's married or has any children, but I imagine if he does, they also would be getting harassed and people would be trying to hunt them down. And also that would be wrong. Let's be clear on that. But that's part of the price you pay for being a controversial character. And your bread and butter, Clementine, is based on your controversy. You're not a pleasant person. You don't try to be a pleasant person. In fact, the opposite. Your career is built around that. So it's not surprising that there is a backlash. Now, once again, I don't think the people who try to track you down, or your husband or your child, are doing the right thing. Obviously, it's wrong, but it shouldn't come as a surprise. Just like it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone else who makes their living out of controversy. Next.
It's in the cost of knowing that the rules are different for you and always will be. That you must be composed at all times and never scrap in the muck laid down by your opponents because your moral purity is measured differently to theirs.
Oh, this is rich. This really, really is absolutely amazing. Oh, Clementine, you're so morally superior to anyone else, right? Sure you are. Once again, Clementine's bread and butter is controversy, is stirring the pot, is getting people angry and annoyed, right? That's her shtick. That's her thing. She's purposely outrageous and controversial. So this backlash isn't because she's a woman or a feminist who is bravely speaking out on the internet against the evils of the patriarchy. No, it's because she acts like a cunt. And people get pissed off. Now, when they get pissed off, they should not be trying to track her down. They shouldn't be telling her that they hope she gets raped or anything like that. That's the wrong way to handle it. It doesn't help. It just gives her something more to be controversial and outraged about. It's non-productive. Next.
You can be told 20 days in a row that you should be raped and sodomized and beaten and strung up and thrown out and taught a lesson. But if on the 21st day you turn around and make a joke about firing men into the sun using a cannon, you are a scold who hates men and is teaching her son that he's a rapist.
Well, there is a difference here, Clementine. The difference is it's not all men who are making these comments. I'm sure you get some of these comments from women as well, right? So when you turn around and you blame all men for the actions of a few men who are pissed off at your controversial ramblings, then yeah, that makes you someone who hates men. Do you not get that? If you are excusing your comments about men in general based on being angry and abused, then surely the people who leave you abusive comments can also use the same excuse, right? They were just angry at your abuse. Do you see how that works? I mean, neither is productive, let's be honest. But it seems like it's a bit of a double standard. Next.
He's the cost too. Since announcing my second book, Boys Will Be Boys, an exploration of toxic masculinity and the bonds of harmful brotherhood, I have been told I should have my son taken away from me. That I am a child abuser who will teach him to hate himself.
Okay, let me start by saying I have no idea whether Clementine is a good mother or a bad mother. I haven't seen her being a mother, right? So who knows? But considering she's written a book called Boys Will Be Boys, an exploration of toxic masculinity and the bonds of harmful brotherhood. And she routinely writes negative things about males and masculinity, including, like she just said, wanting to shoot them all into the sun. I don't think it's a huge stretch for people to think that maybe her son would grow up to hate his masculinity or hate himself in some way. Now, maybe that won't happen, but it is a real possibility. We're not talking about a coffee shop feminist here who, believes a handful of watered-down feminist mainstream theory. We're talking about someone who could be classed as an extremist feminist. I think there's a distinct possibility that your son could grow up to hate himself or aspects of himself, like many male feminists do. Next.
And since uncovering a sardonic joke written in a friend and fellow feminist's copy of my book, a note that Riley asked her if she had killed any men today and if not, why not? A note that was a direct hat tip to the relentless accusation made to feminists that we hate men and want them all to die, and that our efforts to better the world for everybody are actually just code for wanting to commit widespread manocide. A message that was quite clearly withering satire. The same people who tell me all the ways they'd like to hurt me, or who say nothing as other men tell me those same things too, have been using it as an opportunity to double down on their assertion that it's me who poses the real threat to social order.
Something clearly said as a joke which is taken as something serious. Geez, feminists would never ever do that, would they? Take something out of context. Now, let me also state, something can be said as a joke, yet still be bigoted, right? If someone said a joke about black people, that joke can still be racist. Just because it's a joke doesn't make it any less racist. Now, obviously, it depends on context and what the intent of the person was. Also, in what scenario it's said. Someone could be talking to a friend privately, and the friend knows that it's just a joke, and they could be making fun of stereotypes or those type of jokes. It can get complex. When you say something publicly, though, it's a lot easier for it to be taken seriously, even if it's meant in a non-serious way. I shouldn't have to tell you this, Clementine, but you should be a bit more careful. That is, of course, unless, once again, you're trying to be controversial, or you're trying to stir the pot, or you just don't really give a shit until you're called out. I mean, who knows? It also should be taken in context of your body of work, and considering you routinely talk about how toxic masculinity is, and how evil men are, it kind of adds a different light to the joke. Next.
That I am a terrorist who should be reported to ACO. That Docs needs to be made aware of my child and track his welfare. And, as someone saw fit to tell me on my Facebook page, that I am the reason my son will kill himself one day.
I would agree that these are pretty extreme things to tell someone, right? Telling a mother that she's going to be responsible for her son killing himself one day. Look, I agree, it's not a pleasant thing. But, considering the already high male suicide rate, I have to wonder what effect telling your son that masculinity is toxic would have on him. Would that increase his likelihood of one day committing suicide? I would say yes. Telling him that he's privileged and his issues don't count, and that his gender is responsible for all the evils of the world, and he has to somehow shun his masculinity and see it as something as toxic and bad and wrong. I think all these things increase his likelihood of one day committing suicide. His likelihood, which is already higher because he's male. So although I don't think that's a pleasant thing to say to someone on their Facebook page, I do have to say that there may be something to it. Once again, I don't think this is overly productive though, and there are better arguments to be made. Next.
The cost is in the lies. There have been so many lies told about me that started from one tenuously made allegation and snowballed out to include blatant falsehoods. It's difficult to know where to start.
Oh, yeah, and that's ironic, Clementine, because men's rights activists have to put up with this all the fucking time. Need I mention people like Elliot Rodger or Rish V, or the numerous lies told about Cassie J and the Red Pill, or Paul Elam. I mean, the list is really endless. And that's by people like you, feminists in the media, Clementine, who apparently we shouldn't criticise. Because when we do, well, we're only doing it because you're women, not because you're liars. It's an interesting narrative. It really is. Next.
When MRA trolls started harassing the booksellers at Avid Reader in Brisbane for simply sharing my book announcement post, it quickly became clear that half of them weren't even sure what they were protesting. Was it that Avid Reader promoted me in general? Was it that they stocked my old book? Some people seem to think it was because they stock my new book, a book one man described as delusional nonsense despite the fact it hasn't even been written yet.
So the question is, what happened here, and were they MRAs? Well, I found a number of articles talking about it. Basically, the story goes, the bookstore made an announcement concerning Clementine Ford, and a Facebook group then decided to go and leave 1-star reviews for the bookstore. This then spilled onto social media, and a lot of feminists came in and started leaving 5-star reviews. Now, the name of the particular Facebook group, I'm not going to tell you yet. Now, remember, the claim is that they're an MRA group of trolls. So let's have a quick look at some of the articles I've found about this story. The first one is from the Courier Mail. It's called West End Bookshop Wins Against Online Trolls After Promoting a Clementine Ford Book. Now, this story claims that they were men's rights activists. It doesn't give a link to the particular group, though. The Guardian also reported on this in an article called How an Independent Bookstore Took on Anti-Feminist Trolls and Won. Now, it's interesting they use the term anti-feminist here and not men's rights activists. Now, they actually link to a couple of the comments which enabled me to find the name of the actual group. Once again, I'll get to that in a minute. Now, Chris Curry, who is Avid Reader's social media manager, did refer to the people making the comments as men's rights swamp monsters. So I'm guessing the claim that this group is an MRA group came from him. Now, it's interesting, Clementine, there's a quote from Clementine here. It says, "It's tedious and exhausting to deal with a daily onslaught of abuse and paranoia from angry men and their terrified cohorts. It's impossible to have logical conversations with them because they don't care about facts, only about how they feel about those facts." That's interesting, considering Clementine is claiming that this is a men's rights group doing this. Once again, we'll see the name of the group in a minute. In the meantime, let's have a look at a third article talking about it. This is from the Sydney Morning Herald, and it says anti-feminists attack store Facebook page for stocking Clementine Ford's book. Once again, this refers to them as anti-feminists and not men's rights activists. Now, this article actually tells us the name of the Facebook group. And the name of the Facebook group is Anti-Feminism Australia, which is not a men's rights group at all. What was that you were saying about facts, Clementine? Now, look, to be totally fair, there are probably some MRAs who are part of this group, but the point is, it's not an MRA group. Not everyone who is an anti-feminist is a men's rights activist. Chris Curry from the Bookstore doesn't seem to understand this or care, and Clementine just repeated it as if it was fact without actually checking or caring, because, you know, why let the facts get in the way, Clem, right? Now, the interesting thing is, on the same day as the article I just looked at, there was another article from the Sydney Morning Herald which said, Bookshop hits out with humour after Clementine Ford post uproar. And this one just refers to it as men's rights activists, angered men's rights activists. It doesn't mention anti-feminism at all, or link to the actual Facebook page. Once again, why let the facts get in the way of a good story, right? Of course, the Bookshop avid reader also commented that men's rights is not real. Yeah, I guess they don't care about the bodily integrity rights of newborn male children or men committing suicide at 4 times the number of females committing suicide. Apparently, none of that's important or real. Now, having said all that, I have to say I disagree with the way that Anti-Feminist Australia went about this. I don't agree with going to the bookstore and leaving 1-star reviews. I think really that's very similar to what feminists were doing with the red pill. It's a bullshit tactic. The owners of Avid Reader Bookshop and Cafe should have the right to be complete fucking assholes and to stock hate-filled books written by people like Clementine Ford. And people should have the right to go in and buy those books. I don't believe in silencing our opposition. I believe in exposing them. So I have no issue with Anti-Feminism Australia pulling apart one of Clementine Ford's articles or books and criticising it. However, promoting people going in and leaving 1-star reviews, it's something our opposition does, and we criticise them for that. And I don't like people who are meant to be on our side doing the same thing. Now, the interesting thing about this is they had roughly 200 people go in and leave 1-star reviews, and there was a backlash where 2,000 people went in and left 5-star reviews. Now, what makes that interesting is that people like Clementine Ford routinely claim that they're the oppressed class, they're the underclass, they're the struggling minorities who don't have any influence or power in society. Yeah, it doesn't seem really to be reality though, does it, Clem? Next.
Recently, I saw a comment from a man declaring he is trying to rally a group to protest outside the Brisbane powerhouse, where he says, "I'll be launching my new book in a few weeks. I'm actually there to speak at a baby-wearing conference, but facts, once again, are irrelevant."
Okay, so what we're talking about is one man who is trying to rally a group of protesters against Clementine Ford. Now, what makes this interesting is I mentioned earlier in this video another very controversial character by the name of Milo. So earlier this year, when Milo was trying to give a talk, this is what was happening outside.
There, she joins us now. What's going on, Kim?
Well, Anderson, what you're seeing behind me is quite a bit of commotion. This is an event at Berkeley where Milo Yiannopoulos, who is known as an internet troll, a self-proclaimed internet troll, a very provocative speaker, he was invited here to the campus. And you can see from the reaction, I'm going to step out of the shot here. What is happening here is that these are student protesters, some anarchists from what I can gather, and trying to breach the building right now. Oh! Back up! Watch out!
All right, come on. Let's go. Calm down. So we're trying to...
We're backing up. up. We're backing up.
So firing back.
We're backing up.
Can you explain what just happened there?
Turn. What you can see, Anderson, is they're trying to disperse the crowd. The police trying to disperse the crowd. I don't have any idea how many people are here, but you can certainly feel that there's a lot of tension.
Yeah.
From what
Kyung,
I can tell, police officers who are dressed in riot gear are just trying to keep this building where this event is supposed to be happening secure. What we saw are some of the people taking up barricades and trying to ram through windows. And then we're going to try to get a little bit closer again.
Okay, Kyung, if you can just explain, if you can kind of give us the lay of the land. This is, if you're just joining, a demonstration against a speaker who was invited to speak at Berkeley, in Berkeley, California. He's from Breitbart, and there's a number of times in appearances that he's made on college campuses that there have been demonstrations against him. Clearly, this is taking it to a new level. Kyung is saying there were sort of some self-described anarchist types who, often show up at demonstrations like this, who are trying to, in her the building, and we've lost, I think, IFB with Kyung, which we're trying to get restored, but you can see just two different vantage points. That would appear to be the building on campus in which I assume the speech was to take place. I'm not sure if the speaker is inside there or exactly if the speech is continuing or ever even started.
Now, you may have noticed that that's a little bit more extreme than one guy trying to get together a group of protesters. Now, why this is relevant is because Clementine's main argument is this harassment is only happening to her because she's a woman talking about feminist issues. Last time I checked, Milo was neither a woman nor a feminist. And the blowback against him is a lot greater than against Clementine. Now, once again, as I said at the start of this video, Milo is a controversial character. And when you're a controversial character in the public eye, you are going to get this type of treatment, right? You are going to get people criticizing you. You're going to get people trying to dox you, protesting, and the rest of it. Now, a lot of that is wrong, as I've pointed out numerous times throughout this video. But the point is, it's not happening because Clementine is a woman or a feminist. It's happening because she's controversial and she's in the public eye. That's the difference. Next.
Because of the things one pathetic man, an anonymous coward, in particular has written about me over the past few years, I am regularly accused of utter falsehoods. That I bullied a disabled man. That I bullied schoolboys. That I told schoolboys they would grow up to be rapists. That I had a reporter fired because I didn't like the questions he was asking me. That I had a man fired before Christmas and made his family homeless. These things can all be printed and shared and pointed to as evidence despite the fact there's not an ounce of truth to any of them.
Okay, let's start with the claim about the disabled man, which Clementine says there's no truth to, even though she wrote an article about it, which is strange, right? Considering she actually wrote an article talking about it, but it's not true. Yeah, I'm not sure how that works. Anyway, this is the story. On a Melbourne tram, there was a man giving high fives to women. A self-confessed feminist took his picture and posted it on Facebook, where Clementine Ford saw it and she shared it, and I think it got something like 80,000 views and 10,000 likes or something like that. And because the man's face was clearly seen, he was identified. He was doxed. And remember what Clementine said earlier about people trying to hunt down her family members. Apparently that's bad, which I would agree, but apparently doing it to some man on a tram is perfectly fine, right? Because she has the word of someone she's never met before saying that he was harassing women. Well, it turns out that this man was actually autistic on the far end of the spectrum, and this was a regular thing for him to go up to people and to try to get high fives from them. In other words, he is perfectly harmless. He wasn't harassing anyone. He wasn't hurting anyone. This was just his normal behaviour because of his condition. Now, when this came out, Clementine, instead of apologising like a human being would, she doubled down and said she didn't have any proof that this man was autistic, which is interesting because she didn't really have any proof that he was harassing women either, apart from the word of someone she's never actually met, right? I mean, a woman posting something on Facebook would never lie, of course. It's just something women don't do, apparently. So it's interesting that she asked for evidence in some circumstances, but in other circumstances, who cares about the evidence, right? We'll just, as long as it supports your ideology, who gives a shit, right? We'll just go with it, and we'll harass and dox this man and have thousands of angry comments aimed at the poor guy simply because someone said he was doing something, so it must be true. But remember, folks, harassment and doxing and the rest of it only happen to women and feminists online, right? It doesn't happen to anyone else, right, Clem? That's your argument. She's just an amazing hypocrite. She really fucking is. Now, one more quick note before moving on to the next claim she makes, and that is, if you read the original post by the feminist who originally doxed this man, the post that Clementine so gleefully shared, it says this: "You mumbled something and it became apparent that you were tripping balls on something. But I've had encounters before with people who are under the influence, and your behaviour towards the women on the tram was nothing short of fucking predatory. That wasn't the drugs, that was you. I steeled myself up and responded, 'You right, mate?' in a tone that I hoped would imply I wouldn't tolerate your shit. You looked away and spent the next few minutes standing across from us, staring until the young Asian woman I was sitting next to got off and thanked me for sitting next to her." Yeah. So I guess the question is, was the man on drugs, or does he actually have an intellectual disability, like people who actually know him are claiming? Now, at very least, Clementine, having read this, should have maybe considered the possibility that she was wrong. Maybe just considered just a little bit that, maybe she jumped the gun, and maybe the people saying that this guy has an intellectual disability are in fact correct. But no, that would be too much to admit the possibility that she might be wrong. After all, she is the brave vaginal warrior defending womanhood against the evil men's. Yes, such a brave martyr. If she admitted that she was wrong, that would be bowing down to the patriarchy or something, I guess. And she also claims she never got someone sacked, which is another lie. Now, the guy called Clementine Ford a slut. Once again, that's not a tactic I agree with. I think using logical arguments is the best way to go. Abusing people on Facebook is not a good strategy, right? But Clementine turned around and got this guy fired. Because at the end of the day, he is just a guy on Facebook abusing someone. She is actually someone in the media with power. There's a difference there. But I do find it strange that she said these are lies and it never happened. It's pretty clear that it did actually happen. But I guess it's a bit harder to play the victim card when you're the guilty person, right? When you're doing bad things, just like your opposition, makes it a little bit harder to play victim. So I guess that's why she's denying it. Next.
This is the cost. It's in the hypervigilance one starts to practice, assessing all public appearances for potentially dangerous people. It's in knowing where the exits are. It's in grimacing each time you open your email, and wondering what new and inventive subject lines you'll see today.
Now, it's interesting here she mentions opening her email and wondering what new and inventive subject lines you'll see today. And look, I imagine if you get hundreds of emails calling you a slut and saying that your face looks like a building fell on it, that must take its toll. I would agree, right? But let's compare that to someone like Erin Pitsey, who back in the 70s had to send her actual mail to the police because she was getting bomb threats from feminists. Now, once again, the claim from Clementine is that stuff like this only happens to women and feminists who speak out on the internet, etc., etc. Well, it's true, Erin Pitsey is a woman, but she's never been a feminist, and in fact the people who were attacking her were in fact feminists. But apparently that doesn't count for some reason, right? Next.
It's in watching yourself become a more paranoid and fearful person, because you have been sent so much abuse and hate and violence and threats for years that there's literally no other way to be. This is the cost. But I'm not done paying it yet.
On here at the end we hear Clementine, the brave martyr, sacrificing her mental health for the rights of women, and something victim, something patriarchy, something all men are bad, something. You get the idea. Now, look, I think Clementine makes a lot of good points in this article, except for one glaring fault in her argument, and that is she is as bad, and you could argue in some cases worse, than the people she is criticising. She defends her sexist jokes by saying, well, they're just jokes, you can take them, grow up, it's just a joke, right? It's not. She's not serious. Yet at the same time, she attacks her opposition for making jokes and says that jokes need to be taken serious because they're not just jokes. Yeah, no double standard there. She accuses her opposition of being abusive, yet she herself is abusive. Now, I personally believe abuse creates more abuse, so I guess it's hard to say which side started the abuse first. I mean, I think it's a chicken or the egg type thing. And to be honest, I don't really care. It's wrong either way. But apparently it only counts when it's done to Clementine. It doesn't count when she's doing it to other people. She claims that her opposition is more concerned with feels than facts. Yet she continuously gets facts wrong when it suits her cause, right? Apparently the facts don't really count then because her feels are more important. Once again, no hypocrisy. And of course, as I just pointed out a couple of minutes ago, she's against doxing when it concerns her family, but doxing an anonymous man who she doesn't know and doesn't know whether he did anything wrong or not, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that apparently. A bit of harassment towards someone she doesn't know doesn't matter because it's a man, right? And a woman said he did something on Facebook, so apparently that's good enough. So that's what we get with Clementine. We get all these double standards where her opposition are incredibly bad because of their bad behaviour, and that's all there is to them. There's no one making legitimate arguments. It's just all this bad behaviour. Yet at exactly the same time, she is doing exactly the same thing and ignoring any legitimate criticism and avoiding any actual discussion and debate. But I guess that's what you have to do when you want to play the feminist martyr, right?
Ford joins us now. Clem, clearly you cop a lot of hate and abuse online, but how unusual is it that it's coming from schoolboys?
You know, sadly, it's actually not that unusual. I still tend to be quite surprised because I think I just assume that people who would say those things would have some kind of grown-up personality to go along with it, ironically. But, yeah, oftentimes I do find that it's young boys and particularly boys around the age of 14 and 15 who feel like it's okay to say these things.
Now, you didn't name these boys, but you have named and shamed other perpetrators of this kind of behaviour. What's your thinking behind that?
Well, the reason that I do it is because I don't really see that there's any appropriate mechanisms, particularly on Facebook, to really deal with these kind of things. People generally in society, especially say to women, that these are the kinds of attitudes that we need to ignore. That if women want to put themselves out in the public sphere, then we need to expect that this kind of backlash will happen. As I'm sure both you and Carrie have experience of, I think that the power comes from women standing up together and saying this is the reality of what happens when we speak out. This is harassment that all of us experience, and it's not okay. It's not okay to do it in public, it's not okay to do it in private, and it's not okay to do it at all.
Clem, there would be girls all over Australia, I would imagine, that would cop abuse from other schoolboys, vile stuff on their Facebook or online. Would you suggest they name and shame? Would you suggest they take it to the principal? How are they meant to deal with this sort of scenario?
I would actually suggest that, and I know that to be true, that they're having that experience because a lot of them have emailed me in the past couple of days. And very gratifyingly, they've been really inspired by, I guess, the example that I'm trying to set. Too often I think that girls, especially in Australia, are being bullied and being silent about it because they're afraid of further backlash from it. And that's a message that I'm hearing from girls and women everywhere. And the reality is that the more you speak out about it, the more courageous you become about it. So this is something that I've said this past week, is that when you raise voices, you raise courage as well, and that's what I'd like to see in all girls and women in Australia is a raising of courage. One of the reasons why I've chosen to speak out and chosen to name and shame perpetrators is not because their messages personally upset me. It's because I know that we live in a culture where women feel scared to speak out about these things because of what will happen to them, and I want to show them that actually what happens is that people rally behind you and they offer you support, and that makes you stronger.